find out that I'm a linguist, they typically react in one of two ways. The most common is, oh, how many languages do you speak? When I say 2, they tend to react with a mixture of pity and encouragement. As if to say, geez, Danny, well, you keep working and maybe you'll learn another one day. The other common reaction to my occupation is something like mock fear. Oh, I better watch what I say around you, as if I were going to chastise them for using a naughty word or producing an ungrammatical sentence. If people are feeling especially cheeky, they might tell me their favorite linguist joke, something like, you know, a linguist once told me a preposition is a terrible thing to end a sentence with. These reactions are so common that I've started telling people that I'm a musician. At least then, the look of pity and encouragement comes from a place of understanding. Let me take this opportunity to say loud and clear that you don't have to be on guard around us linguists. We're not the grammar police, nor are we professional polyglots. We don't learn languages for a living. If you already knew these things, excellent. If you didn't, and you do now, well, then I've already achieved something with my talk. So, with what linguists don't do out of the way, what is it that we actually do? Well, while all linguists make a living studying human language, we focus on answering different questions. What's the nature of linguistic knowledge? How's it stored in our brain? Access when we have a conversation, read a book, or listen to a lecture? How do babies learn to talk? How did language evolve in our species? Why do languages vary and change over time? Linguists have answered or are still formulating answers to all of these questions. A question that I would like to provide an answer to today for you all is this. What's the role of language in society? It's clear to me that language is designed to be a bridge. In 1883, this magnificent bridge came to span the East River, connecting Brooklyn to Manhattan and making New York City as we know it possible. Right now, language is spanning the distance between us, connecting me and my thoughts to you and yours. Language made it possible for me to formulate a stupid joke about how linguists are misunderstood, and language made it possible for me to coordinate the activities of my lungs, my vocal tract, my tongue, and my lips to disturb atmospheric pressure in such a way as to hit your eardrums, activate neurons in your brain, and cause you to laugh. Some of you, at least, I hope. Language is our most powerful tool for connecting with other human beings. So, the answer to the question, what is the role of language in society, is, to me, this. In its capacity to bridge individual human minds, language makes society possible. Okay, Danny, great. But hold on. I imagine some of you might be thinking, isn't language also sometimes a barrier? Doesn't it feel like the exact opposite of a bridge sometimes? Absolutely. It can sure feel that way. We've all had the experience of not being able to find just the right words to say what it is that we want to communicate. And if we've ever had the opportunity to travel abroad, you've probably also had the experience of being in a place where the people around you are using words and sounds that are unfamiliar to you. Nothing can feel more isolating than not being able to use the local way of speaking in a community in which we find ourselves. However, if you consider each of these cases carefully, what you'll see is that the solution to the problems they present, breaking through the communication barrier, overcoming those feelings of isolation, lies in more language. It lies in finding the right words to communicate what you have in your mind. It lies in putting in the work to learn the ways of speaking of the community in which you find yourself. I'd like you to take just a moment to think about how you've felt when you've done that. That is, when you've made a linguistic connection that was difficult to make, either because it was a real struggle to find the right words to communicate to another person what you had in your mind, or because you put in the labor to learn the ways of speaking of a new community. I hope you'll agree with me that this feels good, satisfying, even thrilling. I hope you'll also agree with me that it's something that we have an instinct to do. That is, we have strong natural urges to connect with those around us via language. Okay, so now we know what it is that linguists don't do. We have a sense of what linguists actually do, and we have an answer to the question, what is the role of language in society? It makes society possible by bridging individual human minds. I'd like to take these ideas and apply them to our American society. What if someone told you that in our country, there was a large group of people who didn't use language this way? That there were literally millions of people who suppressed their urge to linguistically connect with their fellow Americans. In light of what we've just been talking about, you might be surprised by that. You might even find it strange or difficult to believe. But this is precisely what a number of powerful and influential individuals are asking you to believe when it comes to Americans who were born outside of the United States and who moved here later in life. I'm, of course, talking about immigrants. And I'm talking about the idea that immigrants are unwilling, unmotivated, or unable to learn English. If you doubt that this is something that anyone actually thinks, let me provide you with 3 data points that not only show this kind of thinking in action, but that demonstrate how it has made its way into our highest levels of political and academic discourse. This is Harvard political scientist and New York Times best-selling author Samuel Huntington. And this is the first page of an article he wrote in 2009 called The Hispanic Challenge. According to Huntington, unlike past immigrant groups, Mexicans and other Latinos have not assimilated into mainstream US culture, forming instead their own political and linguistic enclaves. And this is Patrick Buchanan, also a New York Times best-selling author and advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan. In his book, Suicide of a Superpower, he warns of the undoing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War and gave the U.S. claim to much of the American West. According to Buchanan, Mexico is moving north. Ethnically, linguistically, and culturally, the verdict of 1848 is being overturned. Will this Mexican nation within a nation advance the goals of the Constitution? Or has our passivity in the face of this invasion imperiled our nation? Finally, consider a press conference that was held in the Roosevelt Room of the White House over the summer, during which President Trump endorsed the RAISE Act, a bill proposed by Senators Tom Cotton and David Perdue that would revise U.S. immigration policy to include English proficiency tests for hopeful immigrants. In his praise of the bill, President Trump signaled his belief that immigrants to the United States are currently failing to assimilate. The reforms in the RAISE Act will help ensure that newcomers to our wonderful country will be assimilated. So, are immigrants actually failing to assimilate? Is there a Mexican nation within the nation? Is the Hispanic challenge real? Might it be possible for us to investigate these questions empirically? Might there be a group of people who have a professional interest in collecting and analyzing the kind of data that would allow us to do this? Yes, and it's not the grammar police. For the last several years, I and other linguists have been studying the linguistic behavior of Spanish-speaking immigrants and their US-born children in New York City and Boston, cities with large, long-established and growing Latino populations, as well as cities with neighborhoods that are well known for their high concentrations of Spanish-speaking residents and businesses. Our data make it possible to treat the Hispanic challenge as a hypothesis, one that makes predictions about the linguistic behavior of Spanish-speaking immigrants and their US-born children. So the basic prediction is one of linguistic non-assimilation. What would this look like with respect to language use and attitudes? Well, presumably, Spanish-speaking immigrants to the US and their US-born children would use Spanish a lot and also have positive attitudes towards it. By comparison, we would expect these people to use English relatively infrequently and have at least not as good an attitude towards English as they do towards Spanish. The data that I'm going to share to you that bear on these predictions come from interviews with 332 Spanish-speaking adults. These individuals range in terms of how long they've been in the US. Some are very recent arrivals, others have spent their entire lives in the United States. They range in terms of their regional or geographic origins and ancestry. They are representative of 20 different Latin American locales, and they also run the socioeconomic gamut. All of our participants were paid for their time. They were interviewed in Spanish. They were assured that their identities would remain anonymous. And as far as I can tell, I actually think they had fun participating in our study. We have every reason to believe that they answered our questions truthfully and as best they could. So I want to show you results for 3 of the many questions that we asked. The first has to do with language use. Which language or languages did you speak with your mother, father, siblings, kids, friends, boss, coworkers, classmates, significant other? The options we gave people was just Spanish, exclusively Spanish, just English, or both. Second question, would you like your children or grandchildren to learn Spanish, English, or both languages? And then finally, are you in favor of or do you oppose legislation that would make English the official language of the United States? So, to see whether answers to these questions varied with respect to experience in the United States, we grouped our participants into 3 categories: newcomers, established immigrants, and US born. The newcomers were people who were born outside of the US, who came here after their 16th birthday and had spent less than 6 years in the United States when we interviewed them. The established immigrants were also born outside of the US, arrived after their 16th birthday, but had spent more than 6 years in the US when we interviewed them. And then finally, the US born were just that. So let's look at the results, starting with the usage of Spanish, English, or both with mother. Now, what you're going to see up here are a number of squares, and there's going to be 3 colors on each square. They're going to correspond to the answers, and in each square there will be 3 columns, 1 column corresponding to each of our immigrant groups. I'll walk you through it. Okay, so here in this first square, we see responses to the question, which language did or do you use with your mother? On the left, we see a column for newcomers, where we see almost exclusively blue. What that means is about 98% of the people who we put into the category newcomers answered this question exclusively Spanish. You can see there's a small fraction of red, indicating that some small number of people in that category use Spanish and English with their mother. If you shift to the middle column, the established immigrants, you see that the blue has diminished. We all of a sudden have some green, which is exclusive English use, and there's more red. The trend continues if you look at the final column. That is the column on the right, the US born. You see less blue, more red, and more green. We see a shift away from exclusive Spanish use with mother to an increased use of English. We see this same pattern among father, siblings, and then children. Notice the trend. Less blue from left to right within each group, more green and more red. An even more dramatic pattern of language shift occurs outside of the family. Here we have significant other, friends, coworkers, and boss. So the thing to note about these 4 squares is the overall low level of blue compared to inside of the family, and the increase in green and red across newcomer, established immigrants, and US born. Let's look at our next question. Would you like your children and grandchildren to learn Spanish, English, or both languages? 99% of our respondents said both. Only 1% said something other than 99%, and it was a plug for English only. Finally, are you in favor of or do you oppose legislation that would make English the official language of the United States? A full 2/3 of our respondents were in favor of English-only legislation. These results run across city, which is to say there's no difference in these trends in New York and Boston. They run across men and women. Both men and women participate in these trends and have these answers to these questions. These trends also emerge across widely varying regional origin, which is to say people of Mexican ancestry don't answer these questions differently than people of Salvadoran ancestry or Dominican ancestry. Finally, these answers and these trends emerge across all levels of socioeconomic status. So, are these results surprising? In light of the view that language is a bridge, one that we instinctively want to cross? No, they're not. In fact, these results about the linguistic behavior of Spanish-speaking immigrants and their US-born children are consistent with what linguists have known about immigrants to the US for a very long time. They adopt the ways of speaking of the communities that they immigrate to. So you may have heard the US described as a country of immigrants. That's a good description of its past and present population. Between 1980 and 2015, nearly 30 million people immigrated to the United States, bringing with them their own ways of speaking. There is arguably more linguistic diversity in the United States now than there ever has been. Has this plagued our country with linguistic separatism? Is there a series of nations within the nation? No. It's because the Hispanic challenge isn't real, nor is any other challenge claiming a particular immigrant group is unwilling, unable, or uninterested in making linguistic connections with their fellow Americans. In fact, all of the available data, studies like the one I just described and others like it, tell us that English proficiency and linguistic diversity are simultaneously on the rise in the United States. A recent report from the Migration Policy Institute put it this way: while a record 64.7 million people ages 5 and older in the United States spoke a language other than English at home in 2015, a growing share of them are also fully proficient in English. There's nothing remarkable about this. Most people on Earth are multilingual. The human brain evolved to acquire and use multiple ways of speaking. We don't need to legislate English proficiency. No one is more aware of the power and value of the words and sounds that the majority of Americans use, the ones I'm using right now, than an immigrant is. It seems fitting to me that this magnificent bridge, the one that brought our biggest city into its modern existence, was designed by an immigrant and built by his US-born son, along with a lot of help from his wife. It's a fascinating story for another day. But I love it because it's a symbol of our powerful urge to make linguistic connections with each other. And I hope you keep it in mind going forward, the next time you think about the role of language in society. I also hope that if you ever come across a linguist at a party and they look a little sad and dejected and misunderstood, you go up to them and you tell them, using your own capacity for linguistic connection, that you know what they do for a living. And that a linguist once told you that language is a bridge, not a barrier. Thank you.